Germany's been divided for most of its history. From the 13th century until 1871, Germany was a fragmentary patch of squabbling states. The nations surrounding Germany often promulgated this, crushing any state that showed potential possibility of unifying the country. This was since a united Germany would dominate Europe, and its attempt to do so was the preeminent struggle of the early 20th century. In real terms, in our world, the German genie's never been put back into the bottle. In the 21st century, a united Germany still dominates the European continent, albeit peacefully. However, this didn't necessarily have to happen. FDR, the American president during the Second World War, wanted to bring Germany back to the way it was before 1871, or by dividing it into a series of small states. That didn't happen, but what if it did? What if Germany was actually divided into 6 different states after the Second World War? How would that have affected borders, culture, demographics, and the like today? That's the question of this alternate history. One of the eras of history that I find really interesting that you rarely hear people talk about is ancient South America. I briefly did some archaeology in Peru, and the amount of cool stuff down there that's practically forgotten by the rest of the world is astonishing. Take Lake Titicaca, or a giant lake in the Andes between Peru and Bolivia that 1,000 years ago housed the Tiahuanacu civilization. I was just watching an interesting documentary on the topic called The Hidden Secrets of Lake Titicaca, which talks about the recent archaeological discoveries beneath the waters of this magical lake. It follows a group of scientists excavating lots of millennia-old artifacts. They find lots of incredible pre-Columbian stuff from this old civilization now lost to time. I was able to watch this on Magellan TV, a documentary streaming service made by filmmakers that has the richest history content of any streaming service. It's got lots of great content ranging across all of history, from biography, folklore, and everything between the ancient world to current events. Magellan's compatible with basically any device and is 4K with no additional cost. Click the link in the description to start learning about whatever inspires you today. Before we start, this video is a collaboration with Alternate History Hub, another YouTube channel in the alternate history space. We're doing a video series where he'll talk about the Morgenthau Plan, which involved splitting Germany into 3 parts and then deindustrializing it. Where I'll be focusing on the Roosevelt Plan, or the one to split Germany into 6 different states. You should check out his video in the link in the description after watching this. It's pretty easy to start this alternate history. There's merely a shift in negotiations among the Allied powers that said that Germany should be divided even further. Maybe news of the Holocaust get out to the general public earlier in the war, and so there's more public pressure to punish Germany for their actions. It doesn't matter a tremendous deal. When you look at Roosevelt's plan to divide Germany, it boils down to effectively redrawing the borders, the previous ducal divisions inside Germany of places like Bavaria, Hanover, Prussia, or Austria. One of the main truths about this division of Germany was that it would be de facto divided between Russian and American spheres of influence. Both armies would realistically be parked and militarily occupying German soil, and viewing the other side as a threat to their entire civilization, would thus not be willing to give an inch. Although this Germany might nominally be called Saxony, Hesse, or the like, in real terms it would be divided between an American and Russian sector. This would be the overriding reality in the situation. On the Soviet side, they'd love the division of Germany since it would allow them to control it more effectively and divide and rule. An important thing to consider here is that the western border of Poland would never have been moved west to the Oder River. In our timeline, the Russians wanted more of a buffer and so hacked off the eastern third of Poland, which they in turn compensated the Poles with by taking a significant portion of eastern Germany. This resulted in shuffling millions of people, whether Poles, Ukrainians, Russians, and Germans, hundreds of miles west to fit into the new borders. In the FDR plan, Russia still hacks off eastern Poland, but the Germans keep eastern Germany. This would actually make Eastern Germany more powerful vis-a-vis Western Germany than it was in our world, but also be a public relations scandal for the Soviet Union, who basically just raped Poland another time while the Poles had fought on their side during World War II. However, let's not beat around the bush here. We're talking about Stalinist Russia, and so public relations don't matter at all. Part of the area that Poland swallowed up, namely Silesia, was some of the most industrialized and historically pivotal parts of the German nation. This would be the equivalent of if Texas was swallowed up by Mexico and all the ethnic Americans were forced out. The Soviets ruled like a traditional empire, and that they were a tool for the dominant ethnic group, the Russians, to extract resources and maintain cultural imperialism from the provinces, which we see in the Soviet policy in Germany, which involved deindustrialization and some of the most active political repression ever seen in history. Meanwhile, the US was an empire built off bribes and concessions in order to build a willing coalition. The US thus invested large amounts in its conquests, gave them preferential trade deals, and allowed them political independence. The American part of Germany, meanwhile, would be terrified of the Soviets. Which leads us to the main problem with this alternate history, in that the reason that the Americans didn't support policies that would weaken, impoverish, or divide Germany was that the Soviets had 3-1 numerical superiority, and thus the Americans wanted to pull on their European allies as hard as possible so they wouldn't lose World War III. We could have eventually seen a creation of a sort of German Union or Confederacy, given that between the Holy Roman Empire, Confederacy of the Rhine, and the German Union, they've been a constant. Also, that the post-World War II era has been one of multinational organizations, whether the United Nations, European Union, or the like. An American organized German federation would form out of, say, Bonn. Similarly, if the US was worried enough by German military force to divide Germany into 6, they probably wouldn't allow a centralized German military command, which they would try to subsume into the broader NATO organization under American command. The creation of these regional groupings would result in a promulgation of local identities, in which the nations would try to create social cohesion by pushing Bavarian, Hessian, or other types of culture. This sort of reminds me of Canada, in which a country that culturally has no right to exist continually finds small reasons like nationalized healthcare, poutine, hockey, and the like to form a national identity. The main influence inside Europe from this divided Germany would be to make France significantly more powerful. We would effectively see a return to the world of the 18th century, in which a divided Germany allowed France to be the most powerful nation in peninsular Europe. France would use the weakening of Germany to create a sphere of influence in Italy, Benelux, and the Rhineland states in Germany. The US would act through France to maintain its control over Europe. This would mean that the European Union would never exist. The European Union is fundamentally built off the alliance between France and Germany, who form such a bizarre coalition that they're able to disarm the rest of Europe. This is because, like all of European history, if a single country was to become too powerful inside Europe, the whole continent would team up against them so that country wouldn't become so powerful as to only push its interests. The British would be livid at the French for being so powerful, and so would try to construct a coalition of Scandinavia and North Germany, possibly including countries in southern Europe against the French. This means that a united Europe would never have formed in this timeline. A major effect of the European Union was to allow peripheral states inside Europe like Spain and Ireland large markets and stable institutions that allowed them to move to wealthy first world status. In a continent divided between a French sphere of influence and the rest, that never would have occurred. Ireland would probably still become wealthy due to being part of the Anglosphere and American influence, but Mediterranean Europe and countries like Spain, Portugal, Italy would be significantly poorer. The Soviet Union would still have fallen in this role just due to the sheer greater degree of incompetency than the United States. Afterwards, with less concentration of German capital, the Germans would not have been the key economic influence and investment they were in Eastern Europe in our timeline. Eastern European countries like Poland and the Baltics would still have seen large economic growth, due to having good fundamentals like a skilled labor force and institutions, but they'd probably have seen several harsh waves of recessions and economic collapses, with slower total progress. Similarly, without the European Union, Poland with the backing of the US would become the main linchpin of anti-Russian defense, with Poland building an economic and military system across the former Warsaw Pact nations. There's no way that as the decades passed, Germany would become pacified and the Russians would stop being a threat, the German Federation wouldn't become more and more of a real organization. In the new Europe in which war was no longer a threat, or the raison d'etre for the divided Germany, there seems to be no reason why Germany wouldn't in real terms become more unified. In total, this Europe's a strange place. It's far more similar to how Europe's been across its whole history, with lots of different power blocks and divided between British, French, and Polish spheres of influence. The European continent would probably be under American influence, since the Europeans would trust the US more than their own European neighbors. What a faultist, and thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that video, please like, comment, subscribe, or stay tuned for additional content. Or alternatively, check out my Patreon, where I've got a couple hundred pages of both my cultural history of America and history of the world. Or alternatively, check out the links in the description for my Instagram and Twitter. As always, thanks so much for watching and have a great day.